wonderful title for a theme for Travelers Club. So I thought I would just follow that path, all right? Let me see. It gives me an opportunity for my talk. I thought of the daily news cycle covering the bad, the good, and the ugly on immigration, legal versus illegal, tearing our country apart. I thought of my own journey to this country and decided to present my talk today, entitled, come on.
Pointed at that.
I told you I'm technically challenged. It's called, titled Pathway from China to America. It's a pretty simple title. I'm not going to get involved with the current politics, but simply describe my personal journey to this country and my experience. You're going to have a little geography lesson first. Okay. Just a sketch of China so you get a general idea. It's in this area, covers about the same size as the United States. All right, just kind of pretend it's a different shape. And I have 4 arrows, red arrows, and those involve the cities that I'm going to be talking about, or where I went or come from. It's a big city, Shanghai. You probably have heard of it. It's on the sea coast, and it's very equivalent to New York City. You can just think of New York City. That's Shanghai to China. All right, commerce and culture, fashion, business, wheeling, dealing, it's all there, Shanghai. And my parents' family came from Shanghai. Then over here, it's called Chongqing. It's not the canned goods in the grocery store. That got me crazy when I first came here. Chongqing. It was the wartime capital of China. It's in the interior of China. All right, it's over here. And down here, you probably have heard of Hong Kong, right? Made in Hong Kong. It's also on the coast. Hong Kong is actually a British colony because it belonged to China a long time ago. And when China had a war with Britain called the Opium War, don't listen to my history lesson here. China lost the Opium War, okay, because Britain was exporting opium to China. So China lost the war, so gave away Hong Kong. So Hong Kong became a British crown colony. So anybody who born there is a British subject. Okay, it has not much of British because it's about 99.9% Chinese, and it's a big business city. And here in the water is the island of Taiwan. You might have heard of it, and with the capital Taipei. And that's another history. It belonged to China, but when China had a war with Japan called Russo-Sino War, of course China lost the war. We're not very good at wars. And so we gave away Taiwan to Japan. So Taiwan was under the Japanese rule for about 100 years or so. And it was given back to China when Japan lost the war in after the Second World ended. All right. So those are the 4 key places, and don't feel confused. It's kind of easily confusing. Okay, so that's where I'm going to touch upon. Let me click this. Come on.
Oh,
Yeah, I
no,
want
sorry.
to. I missed one. Okay. We're going back to 1937. All right. This is my parents getting married in Shanghai. High style. They had the tall this building, think of Empire State, and the top there's a ballroom and a banquet room. And so they were married on that top floor. My mother had just graduated from Yanjing University, situated in Beijing, the capital, or you also hear like Peking. About 4 years ago, I gave a talk here about searching for her college thesis. And by the way, eventually we found it. It was in the Peking Library. And my father went to St. John's University, a Christian connected university in Shanghai. And after that, he went to, I shall not repeat the name too loudly here, he went to University of Michigan. And I came to Ohio. So he got his MA from U of M in economics. So he had just returned from the United States and they were married in Shanghai. Life was good. And the next picture is just a bridal portrait of my mother. So they were happily married, happily ever after, not so ever after. At that time, Japan was causing problems, all right, invading, and it's coming. If we go back to the map, it was coming from the north, coming into China. So my parents thought eventually they're gonna come down to Shanghai. So they left and they went to Hong Kong. Remember that city that's British? Okay. So they went to Hong Kong, thought they would, my father had business there, so they would settle. And they got to Hong Kong, and shortly after that, my brother was born in 1939. If you remember what I said about the history, anybody born there is a British subject. So my brother got to be a British subject, but just being born in Hong Kong. So life is not too bad with a little baby and a new young couple. And until 1941, all right? 1941, December 7th. Raise your hand, who knows what's that day?
Hiroshima.
Huh?
Hiroshima. Pearl Harbor, I'm sorry.
Pearl Harbor. Yeah, Pearl Harbor happened, right?
Yes.
And war started taking full swing at this, and Japan started invading, okay, and really coming through. And they coming into Hong Kong, and my parents quickly had to pack some clothing and flee with a 3-year-old boy on foot. I don't know how many of you have read the book, The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, and then later they made a movie. The opening scene of the mother with the 2 babies on the road trying to flee, and that was my parents. All right? Now, I mean, not same situation. Okay, so they had to flee like overnight, just take off, and they were on foot, and sometimes they would get an ox cart to take them, you know, from point A to point B. And my mother said they even had bandits who became very patriotic and would ferry them across the river. Right? So it was about like an 800 miles of journey. So that took them almost 6 months to get from Hong Kong to Chongqing, which was the wartime capital of China. And they got there in June of 1942. My mother was pregnant with me. So I was born in Chongqing. I didn't get the British citizenship on June 25th, 1942, shortly after they arrived into the wartime capital of China. And situation was not too good. My mother said she's a very fussy person. So she was a home ec major, everything has to be tip-top condition. She said, oh, the hospital was so dirty. She said, I saw rats running around. So it was not too pleasant. And my father went out to get a can of milk powder to help out with the nursing. And they told me it was called Klim. Have you ever heard of that brand? Okay. It was supposed to be American or Western, and it's milk spelled backwards. K-L-I-M. Klim. Klim was the brand of the milk. I guess in China they just did it backwards. So this was the situation. It was wartime. It was very, very chaotic. So that's why I'm turning into like this. My mother started working for American Embassy in Chongqing, and she always believed in working, have a career. And so I would show you the next picture.
Behind you.
Yes, dear. This little baby doesn't know how to operate the stuff. Okay, this is me around 1 year old. I dug up this picture, and what happened to her? What happened to her was, I think maybe when I was 5 years old or something, I decided I want to make the baby pretty. So I painted it. That's why she's kind of have runny pink on her and with red lipstick. And the furniture is also pink. So that was a self-portrait. So life was pretty austere, and I remember even as a baby, things were, pretty make-do kind of a situation. And so my parents worked. Even though I had an ama and servants and everything, it was not as elaborate as in Shanghai. And let me see what's the next. Oh, I'm ahead of myself. So I'm going to be talking a little bit. Don't look at them. So then war ended in 1945 when Japan surrendered, and all the army, they had to retreat back to Japan. Okay, so China can return to its kind of normal situation. And my family, my dad has 2 children, and they took the 2 kids, and we went to Shanghai, returned, so to speak, to where we came from, all right? And so we were there. I went to nursery school there, and let me just stop right here and kind of explain. Every city I have mentioned speak a different dialect, all right? Hong Kong speaks what we call Cantonese dialect. And when we in Chongqing, that speak a Sichuan dialect. And Shanghai, of course, has its own dialect. And the dialects are not just an accent, like Southern and Western accent. It's a total different sounding language. It's like French or Spanish. So you have to learn the dialect to get by, So that was one reason China was so not united, because it's so broken up, even by language, by spoken language. Written is all the same, but when you're speaking, let's say you're talking to the cab driver, you got to talk to local dialect. And so by this time, we have covered 3 different dialects, right? So when I went to Shanghai, I knew Shanghai dialect because even though I was born in Chongqing, because the family came from there. So I know Shanghai dialect, but I had to go to nursery school. I think I had some adjustment to do because the dialects were different, because I was used to the Chongqing, the way I was born, Chongqing dialect, all right? And but life was still pretty good, and my parents sent me to nursery school, and of course, I was not too very helpful. I did not like the lunch in school. So mother I still remember, mother made arrangement to have me be picked up, go to a friend's house that's near the school for lunch. And I remember Auntie Nellie served me lunch. Auntie Nellie had just came back from United States, so she was very westernized. She served me wonderful sandwiches. So to this day, I still remember Auntie Nellie. So I got a lot of special treatment. So we worked in Shanghai a little bit, and then the next thing happens, okay? The communists were coming through China and getting closer and closer to Shanghai. There was terrible inflation. And so again, my parents had to flee. So this time they went first class. They had relatives, they chartered a plane. And I remember that, going on the plane with my parents and flew out of Shanghai to Hong Kong, back to Hong Kong, because Hong Kong was under British rule, so it was immune from communist encroachment, Japanese, whatever, before. So we landed in Hong Kong. My mother was pregnant again with my sister. That was in the winter of 1948. And I was probably, 1940, I was 6 years old. And I had gone to school a couple years when we were in Shanghai. Now we start in Hong Kong, a new dialect, Cantonese. And it was like Greek or French. When I go to school, I had to learn quickly. So that was a challenge. And I think I was put back a year because of that, okay? So for my whole life, I was very self-conscious about being the old kid in the class, right? So we were there, and this is Hong Kong. You can't see it too well. Hong Kong was very congested, and so there wasn't much green space. We lived in an apartment building, and this is the roof of the apartment building. And these are my two grandparents, and they were visiting, and my baby sister was born in 1949. So I was going to second grade, I think, and we did a lot on the rooftop, like throwing firecrackers down. my brother was the bad one. So I just want to show you, we were back in Hong Kong, and this is probably was a Christmas picture. Also, again, on the roof. Somehow we do a lot of stuff on the roof. And that's the three of us. And that lasted from 1949 to 1952, 3 years. So you're getting the idea. We did not live at any place more than 3 or 4 years. A lot of moving around, okay? A lot of dialect changing, a lot of local custom changes. Even though they were financially pretty well off, we had help, servants, and everything. Nevertheless, when you go to school, everybody's the same, So it was a lot of adjustment for us. Now, in 1952, we went to Taiwan, okay? And this is my parents in the botanical garden in Taiwan. And this is a park, actually, that I used to walk back and forth to grade school when I was there. My mother, again, worked at the American Embassy in Taiwan, in Taipei. And my father still was in shipping or banking business, okay? And boy, I got the speaker on. Okay, just want to explain a little bit about Taiwan. I don't know if you remember, this is a test actually, nobody need to remember this. Taiwan was given to Japan, remember, with the Sino-Japanese War, so it was under Japanese control for almost 100 years. So a lot of the things left over from Japan's control was still there. They had to give it up after World War II, after Japan surrendered. So we lived in a Japanese house, right? To us, it would be called very primitive. There was no flush toilet, no toilet, okay? And I just remember the latrine cart comes to pick up the waste, okay? And even though we had a lot of servants, we had cooks, we had laundress, we had maids, we had nannies and chauffeur, gardener, but still the living was primitive. We had to take shoes off when we get into the house because the floor was made of mats. And there was no window. The windows were just a wooden frame with paper, thin paper. But it's a Florida type of weather. So, when there is a typhoon or hurricane, they take out the wooden boards to cover it. So I was over here, and my sister was a baby then. And this is what in front in our little alley. I was more grown up here, and I would just quickly go. I will quickly go to grade school graduation. Okay, this is the school I went to. It was co-ed. You can see we were in uniform. We had to wear khaki uniform in the summer, and in the winter time we had green shirts and black skirts for girls and black pants for boys. And why is it green? Anybody understand? Okay. It's supposed to be camouflage in case there's a bombing from the communists. Okay, it didn't. So this is the group picture, the graduating class of 1955, all right? And the boys have to have shaved heads or kind of short. It's cool now, right? Very, very radical. But in those days, you know, like this is the teacher. A lot of them had to have, over here, they actually not right. They have longer hair. And girls are supposed to have short hair with the earlobe showing. If the earlobes are not showing, that means your hair is too long, right? It has to be straight, okay? We all have straight hair. Except in this picture, there is one girl who had curly hair. It's over here, and she looked very unhappy. And that was yours truly. Because my mother says, well, you might as well have a perm, it's the summertime. I said, I'm not out yet. I'm not allowed to do this. I was so petrified. Oh no, Mom says, have a perm. I'm gonna have a perm. So I was like, so uncomfortable, afraid you're gonna do something, all right? So that's the souvenir from my mother. And something else we had to do. We had to study for entrance exam to junior high school. It isn't like you just go, you know, here, time to go. We had to study from the 5th grade for 2 years. We had school from Monday through Saturday. No summer break, no winter break. All right, we were boning up for the exam. And so everybody had to study. And by the time we finished, we graduated, the exam starts in that summer. So went to take the exam, and then they post the results a month later. And they would post the names on a sheet of paper and they put it on this brick wall. And I remember the evening it came out, I went with my friends to see what's happening, hoping, oh gosh, hope we, get into a school or something. So when we went, I still remember, I found my name on the wall. And it was to the best junior high school for girls in the city. So I got to the number 1, it's actually even called number 1 girls junior high school. So I guess all that study paid off. And here, so I thought, well, I can't just coast down. In 7th grade, I can really mess around, because this entrance exam is not going to happen until 2 years later. So 7th grade, I really mess around, didn't pay much attention to schoolwork and all that, having a great time. And then heard from my parents, we're moving. We're going to the United States. So I had never stayed at one place for more than 4 years up to then. So, of course, this is good. If I go to the U.S., I don't have to ever have these examinations, right? That's one silver lining here. This is with my grandfather before we were leaving. And my brother had to stay because being a boy of that age, he has to finish school and finish military obligation, and then he could come. So that's the story up there. And is that the next one? Yeah, I guess so. The scenery changed. 1957, we flew this time to Seattle and then come across and to New York City. And my first impressed memory was in Seattle. We landed and we went to a soda fountain place. What do you call them? What is it? Like a drugstore, right? We went there to have some supper, and we sat on the thing, whatever. And I thought, my gosh, this is fantastic, They have all these red cans lined up against the wall. And then if you want soup, they just take one can and open it. And right away you get soup. It was out of this world. So impressed. Oh, and the vacuum cleaner. Oh my God, it's so wonderful. And we lived in the hotel a little bit before they found an apartment. So while we were in the hotel, my mother made me learn typing because there was nothing else to do, and she had a typewriter, she was a typist, so I had to learn typing. So I practiced typing in the hotel. And finally, they found an apartment in Queens, which is one of the boroughs. And am I advancing? Yeah, I'm advancing too far. I'll leave it here. So we went to Forest Hills, and it's a very good neighborhood. And by that time, my grades were so messed up. So I went to junior high school, Halsey Junior High School. Somebody else in this room knows that school. And it's 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, 3 grades. David got these pictures on the internet. I didn't save these from way back. So I went to Halsey without knowing English. And in those days, they don't have special tutor for foreign students, nothing. Just drop you right there, and you figure it out, all right? And I remember the operative word was follow. Just follow somebody, okay? So I had no clue. I'm in an English class or history class or whatever. And I carried this little dictionary. I will pass it around. It's kind of worn out. And it was English to Chinese. It's because I got to look it up. I don't know all the words. So I will pass it around for you to look at. It's very small print. My eyes are no good anymore to read it. So I tag along, and I have to say at this point, the American student kids are so generous, so kind. Everybody was helpful. I never had 1 minute of being put down, or being yelled at, or being made fun of. And to this day, I get very sentimental about that. So I followed. And I had a homeroom teacher, Mr. Joy, who taught science, and he was kind of really strict teacher, but he liked me and he helped me a lot. And later I found out he was from Toledo, Ohio. So that was my first connection with Ohio. And so this happened, let me try to get this sorted out here. Yeah, I said lost, follow. I was good in a couple of things I was good at. Typing. I just learned it. And some of the kids were going to, become secretary or whatever. So typing was one of the classes they gave. And the other one was math. Because in China, the math was much more advanced than here. I mean, they made us memorize the multiplication table backwards and forwards, and I mean, we would drill like crazy. So I was good in math and in typing and kind of okay with the art. But the rest of it, I had no clue what I was doing. So every day I would come home and go through it and try to figure out what I'm supposed to do and all that. And I was in a Spanish class as a second language. And I didn't know I was in a Spanish class for a long time. Finally, I caught out I was in Spanish. And then later somebody asked me, why did you take Spanish? Why didn't you take French? I said, I don't know. So I asked the teacher, why did I take Spanish? They said, well, when you came, we thought Spanish would be easier for you. Why would Spanish be easier for me with Chinese background rather than French? You know, that shows how ignorant the educators were also, you know. And we have come along. I think now they have special tutor and all that kind of thing. In those days was just, it's your problem. And so I will go home and try to, are we okay? Okay, so I'm too long-winded here. So I did a lot of homework and was very frustrated. I wanted to go back to Taiwan many times, you know. But the kids were always so nice. They would invite me to their house, and if they have a party, they would include me, and they try to help me to understand a lot of the things. And I never forget that, okay? So finally graduated from Halsey Junior High School, and then moved on to Forest Hills High School, the big time. This building is the only thing for that school. There's no other building. This building taught 4,000 students. 4,000 students go to that school, and we did it in shifts. So 10th grade would be in the late afternoon. Seniors, the 12th grade would come first, 8 o'clock to noon or so. And the juniors were in the middle of the day. And so we were in shifts, the classes. And there was no baseball field, no, forget about football, this is a city school. So there was there was a swimming pool, right? And I can't remember there was much sports. Yeah, we just went out for drills and run around, and that was it. But it was a very good school academically. It was listed because, well, there were a lot of Jewish kids. They were smart, and some Asian kids. And so that's why I kind of struggle along, trying to manage with this whole thing. And I always dreamed that one day if I can speak English without going through a mental translation, it would be like heaven. Okay. So then we have to look at college, right? After high school. And the neighbor where the apartment, we live in the apartment there, downstairs on the first floor, there was a family, the Western American family. The husband was a minister, and the wife, Mrs. Wolf, was a secretarial teacher. She taught at night to the business school, shorthand and typing and all that. And they had 2 little boys. And she would call me sometime or come up the stairs and ask me if I can babysit. So I babysit for her 2 little boys, and she would march off to work. She said, "Oh, I always admire your mother. In the morning, I like to see her come down to go to the UN. She's all dressed up in the Chinese dress and all that." So she admired Kitty a lot. And later I found out she was from Ohio. So I thought, well, I am going to Ohio for college. I was determined, all right? And so I applied 4 colleges. 3 of them were in Ohio. The 4th one was a safety school in New York. And so I applied for Wittenberg. I didn't apply for College of Wooster. I didn't know about College of Wooster. I applied for Wittenberg, Denison, and Case Western. And I got into all of them. And then, time to decide. I was getting a little bit chicken to leave. And my father, he's kind of very strict in some ways. With money, he was very strict. He says, well, each kid is going to get $5,000 for college, and that's it. It's your business. Whether you spend it, you don't spend it, not enough, you make it, you know. So $5,000 is what you're going to get. I said, oh, okay. And I thought, $5,000, I don't know, I have enough, you know. You have to live in the dorm, and then if I don't go, then I keep the $5,000. So I quickly did some calculation and thought, I think I'm staying in New York. And the New York city, part of the city system, is tuition free. And we didn't have to pay anything except we had to pay like $37 for student fee. And it's nearby. You can take the bus to school and live at home, except, you know, you don't get the social life in the college dorm life. And so I decided to stay. Turned out to be the best decision I made. I will explain that later. So I went to Queens College, and what was I gonna say? I was gonna say, yeah, I saved the money. That was nice. And oh, it was $37 for student fee, okay? And we had a riot, had a demonstration when the governor of New York at that time was Rockefeller. He was the governor. They raised the fee to $50 or something like that. So the student demonstrated, how dare you raise it from $37 to $49. So that was very important in that state. So that was my, I'm going to advance this. Do we have one of Queens College? Oh, okay. When I was in Queens College, it was a commuter school, and I was majoring in mathematics, and things got a little bit easier. Queens did have a lot of requirements to take, a lot of classes where economics, history, art, all that we had to take. And in the summer of 1964, New York World's Fair. Anybody went to the World's Fair? I didn't see you guys. Okay, it was nearby, and it was a nice summer job to find over there. And this is the Unisphere, right? You remember that. The Chinese Pavilion is right there, right? It's not in the picture, but it's right across the walk there. So I went and worked at the Chinese Pavilion, put on the Chinese dress, and was a sales girl selling junk there, you know, the souvenirs. So that was summer, and a lot of people, I would get very irate. A lot of the tourists who came and said, "You're not Chinese. Yeah, your English doesn't sound like Chinese." I am Chinese. I was so irate. So that was summer of 1964. There was a little, I made some pocket money there. Okay. At the same time, my grades were getting a little difficult. The math was getting really hard in junior year and senior year, and I was not a piece of cake with that math. It was like theory and sets and all that. So I thought maybe I should take an easy class to get my grades up. And I heard about this professor who had arrived a few years ago and before that, and he had a great reputation, and he has a following. It's like students tag along him. He was a bachelor, and he was so dynamic, so colorful. And he taught Chinese language, Chinese philosophy, Chinese history, and I don't know what else, maybe Chinese food. No, he was very fussy with food. So Dr. Solomon, he had finished his doctorate at Harvard and came. And so I thought, well, I can take something like Chinese history or something. I should be able to ace that class, right? So I signed up for a Chinese class, and there were a bunch of his past students, so to speak, that hover around him, and he just great. So I was just like a visitor there. And didn't really belong because I wasn't majoring in East Asian studies or majoring in Chinese history or whatever. And unfortunately, that fall, I got sick, and I was home for like 2 weeks. I couldn't get out of bed, and I got the Meniere's disease. Anybody who knows, it's a balancing thing. So I was laid up, and towards the end of it, the phone rang, and I picked it up. And this guy said, "Oh, I'm in your class. This is David Gedalecia." I said, "I'm just calling. You haven't been to class. What happened to you?" So I said, "Well, I've been very sick." So I said, "Oh, well, good. Are you getting better?" Or all that. So when I got back, and he was one of those pets. And so we kind of befriended each other from that point on, and the rest is history, I guess. So we both graduated in 1965, and I will show you just a short picture of me in my gown. We had to have this. This is the one that Bobby Kennedy was the keynote speaker, was the commencement speaker. And here is the theater, the speech theater, and the speech class in the theater. I just want to tell you a short story on that. Speech was required. There was a lot of required classes we had to take. So speech was one of them. So that was not too good for me because I was petrified. you had to give different type of speeches, extemporaneous, which I'm trying to do, not really, and persuasive or whatever. So by the time we were doing persuasive, I didn't know what I was going to give. So somehow I was reading the Reader's Digest, and there was an article about the refugees who jumped on boats from China and went to Hong Kong to escape the communists. And there were so many of them, they were being turned back by the Hong Kong authority and sent back to China. All right. So that was the whole refugee situation. So I had a speech about it, pros and cons and all that, and I gave it, and I could have used it now, but it's not the same situation in this country. So I won the award. Maybe because I was Chinese. So I got a plaque and get to the speech dinner. So that was my proud moment because I thought that was going to be the Achilles heel for me to take that speech class. So this was in front of that building, and also East Asian Studies classes were in that building. David knows that very well. So we both graduated from Queens College, and he went on back to he went to Harvard for his graduate degree, and I went to New York Life to do, we called it in those days, data processing. Okay, it's computer programming. And I did it 1 year, and then I went to Columbia 1 year for graduate school for Chinese literature. And that pushed us to 1967. He got his MA in Chinese history, and I didn't finish my degree at Columbia, and I decided to change MS to MRS. And with a little difficulty with my mother, she was very disappointed. Marrying a Chinese kid? No. Okay. So we were married in 1967, and I followed him back to Boston, and he went and continued his doctorate at Harvard, and I went to work at John Hancock Insurance Company doing IT. In those days, it was called data processing. And that's about the story of, am I losing anything? I think people are getting tired. This is just a picture. Sometimes we go out on weekends. It's Sturbridge Village, which is western part of Massachusetts. And this is kind of crazy picture. Easter Sunday, we took our dogs to Boston Common, which was Boston Public Garden, which is very popular. And I don't know how David took this picture, and then in the evening, on the local news, did a picture of me with the dog. I didn't have a hat on. I didn't have, just there. This is the information. This is they took a picture of me. I get use me for the paper, Boston Herald Traveler, about computer stuff. And David graduated 71 from Harvard with a PhD in intellectual history. And then I get to go to Ohio. We got hired by the College of Wooster, and we came in 1971 in front of a God chapel. So all that time, I was so impressed with Ohio. And we haven't left yet, since 1971. And a couple years later, we started having kids, the usual stuff, and they're all gone. And then I will end with this last picture. This is the preacher's wife, Mrs. Wolf, who lived downstairs from us. They moved to San Antonio, and I kept in touch with her. And many years later, 2012, she came back because she has a cousin working at the College of Wooster in the phys ed department. And this is Worcester, if you can, this is Worcester Inn, where the lobby is. Okay, she came back to see my mother. She was always very fond of my mother. And we had a picture taken, and she said, I said, what else are you doing here? She said, well, I'm going to see my hometown. I said, what is it? Loudonville. Oh, this is right. And of course, she told me that in New York, I wouldn't know what Loudonville is. So she was from Loudonville. So in closing, I'm not going to get away too much from my little blurb because I'm going to mess it up. So after roaming from one end of the earth to the other due to Japanese invasion, communist takeover, migration to a foreign country on the other side of the world, I had never lived at one place for more than 4 years until I moved to Worcester. Okay, Worcester is really special. We have lived here for 47 years, raising a family, having our career, and caring for my widowed mother, who was here for 18 years. David's mother also came, and we can honestly say we're very lucky to call Worcester home. So I truly appreciate and thank this special country with its generous and kind people. United States is a very special country, and I feel very lucky or fortunate to be here and to be an American. I became a citizen on April 12, 1971. I was sworn in by Teddy Kennedy. He was the senator of Massachusetts, and I was still in Massachusetts at that time. One of the advantages was my father did through a lot of immigration paper. You always probably wonder, how come it took you that long, you know? It does take a long time, and he was called a treaty traitor. My mother was at the UN, all that. To make a long story short, the whole process took many, many years, so over a decade. But I was the first one in my family to become a citizen because if you married an American, your wait time is shortened. So that was the reason why I married. My wait time was shortened by, I think, 15 months or something. So thank you very much for listening to me.
I talked to Jim Paul today. He's the guy that will come in and set up all this equipment. He brought